Welcome, everyone. It's nice to see so many people join today. It's a little bit blurry out my window, which is the perfect time to have a meeting like this over lunch. So thanks for joining. I'm Joanne Hughes, the Capacity Development Coordinator for the Ontario Federation of Agriculture. I will put my email in the chat. I will also put Ian Noakes' email in the chat. I will introduce him in a moment. And I will also add a link, which I will do right now. Oh, that's not the link. I will put a link in the chat to a list of our member service representatives throughout the province. They are a great resource for information, and we have member service representatives all throughout the province. So if they are not able to answer your question, we have a lot of policy research staff members as well with OFA. So somewhere, somehow, we'll find an answer for you and help you along. I am going to introduce Ian Noakes. He is our part of our research policy staff at our head office, and he will say a few words and introduce our speaker for today.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ian Noakes. I work in the research department at the Ontario Federation of Agriculture. I'm a policy analyst and I deal with transportation issues. So I'm happy today to have Scott Butler with us. Scott is the executive director of Good Roads. He's been the executive director for about 4 years now. Prior to that, Scott was the government relations lead for Ontario Good Roads Association for about 10 years. And prior to that, and during his career, I think Scott's been really focused on having better communities and better roads for his whole career. So Scott has a lot of experience and good advice for how we can improve the safety of our farmers and the general public on the road. Also along with us today is James Zavitz, OPP officer in Ontario. And if there are some questions possibly related to some of the regulations and regulations, if we have to, James has agreed that
you're recording it.
He could try to help us answer those questions. So without any further ado, delay, I think we should introduce Scott Butler.
Well, thanks, Ian. I appreciate the introduction. I'm afraid my background's even more checkered than you let on for this audience. I am a recovering former OMAFRA staffer from way back when, having worked in the strategic policy branch when many of your members were upset about things like oilseed prices and case payments and things like that. So if I suddenly break down and cry, fear not. It's me. It's not you. Anyways, to the point that Ian raised about general road safety, I want to walk you through a presentation and give you a bit of context of some of the concerns we've heard at Good Roads, give you a bit of background on the organization, and lay out really what we think is a strategy for moving forward. So bear with me while my rather rusty skills try to recall how to share the screen. Sorry, the host muted me. Not sure what that was about. Anyways, we are the oldest municipal association in Canada. Founded in 1894, we represent 421 municipalities and 21 First Nations across Ontario. You'll see slightly outdated numbers there. We're in the process of our renewals. But the Good Roads Association is part of a broader social justice movement that began in the United States in the 1870s. I tell folks it was this unholy alliance of two political entities that would be impossible to imagine working together, cyclists and farmers. And together they came together in the 1870s, advocated for essentially better investment into linear infrastructure, mainly roads, farmers wanting to get products to market, cyclists wanting to have smoother surfaces in which to get around in their new ways of getting around. You see there on the left, the Gospel of Good Roads, a letter to the American farmer. The Bible has four, we only have one. Right, how do I advance? Here we go. A little bit about municipal roads in Ontario. So our mandate is specifically with regards to municipal roads. 443 of the 444 municipalities in Ontario have roads. The County of Frontenac is the only one without roads in their portfolio of responsibilities. And we undertook an interesting exercise to actually sort of understand what the extent of the road network in Ontario is. And here's what we found. Whoops, getting a little bit of delay on my end. There are, as of 2019 data, roughly 303,000 lane kilometers of roads in Ontario, and 75,000 kilometers of those roughly are unsealed. So low volume or gravel or whatever sort of terminology you want to apply there. The City of Toronto, as a municipal entity, has the largest network at almost 15,000 lane kilometers, and the Village of Westport in Eastern Ontario has the fewest with 9 lane kilometers. The replacement value in 2024 dollars, if we were to build these roads out today on the cheap, we'd be looking at about $117 billion outlay. More importantly, and the reason why we tried to quantify this, the maintenance backlog on those 303,000 lane kilometers of roads is currently approaching $42 billion. That is not an infrastructure deficit. That is just the amount of capital that would be required to get the existing road network up to not a new state of repair, but a good state of repair. A good state of repair might be a road that has been for 4 or 5 years and been driven on. In Ontario, we have roughly 9.5 million registered vehicles as of 2022. Make sure I got both of those. Yeah, by any measure, these are really, really big numbers. The immensity of these numbers also carry a lot of risk for road authorities. As I think, depending on how you decide to splice the economic apple, the agri-food sector in Ontario is either the largest or second largest sector of the economy. The road network is one of the primary economic drivers of your competitiveness and your viability when trying to when moving goods and moving people. We need to account for the risk inherent in that. For every operation in Ontario is the risk associated with using these assets. So what does this look like? Well, risk looks like this. You see 6 photos there. 5 of them are from Ontario. The only one that is not is in the lower right-hand corner. And that is because of a terminal, end rail terminal, that was recalled by the Ministry of Transportation that did not perform. It is not the intention of road authorities to install products that impale vehicles, but unfortunately that was a real life case that led to a lot of legal problems for a company in the United States. And the Ministry of Transportation spent, I think it was approximately $20 million replacing those products that were in the roadway here in the province. So what's this look like when we actually start quantifying it? Well, in 2020, we had all of 400 traffic fatalities on municipal roads. 17% of the people in Ontario at that time were living in rural communities, but almost 55% of all the fatalities that year took place on rural roads. So 217 out of 398. No matter how you splice it, no matter how you look at it, rural roads present a higher degree of risk for road users than urban or suburban roads. This is just a fundamental fact. It is not unique to Ontario. We see it play out in jurisdictions across the world and across the country. When you look at what this means, we're looking at almost 150,000 collisions in Ontario, total of 498 fatalities, 23,000 personal injuries, property damage, approaching 124,000 incidents, This is with 142,054 million kilometers traveled during that year. Now, the reason I put an asterisk there, so we see these numbers, and let's put this in a bit of context. So 498 people killed in a public space. This is the only area within the public domain that we accept this risk, right? There's nowhere else we do. We saw what happened with the tragedy in Walkerton with the water supply. Immediately, we snapped to attention. We got to work. We fixed the problem, and we haven't seen a recurrence. But for whatever reason, we still accept a really high degree of risk and an unacceptable number of fatalities and injuries associated with our road network. That asterisk is there is because the ministry calculated, and I think it's a little dubious, that in 2020 there was only a 2% overall reduction in travel compared to the previous year. And when we look at those numbers, we see they estimate 145,000 million kilometer vehicles traveled. I think that's a bit of an overestimation. During the lockdown, we know the volume on roads plummeted. So when we go back and look at these numbers from 2020, I actually think they're indicative of a much, much higher risk associated with traveling during that time. But it's not just numbers. For the OFA, risk also looks like this. We see now vehicles. This is a often used photo. That road was probably designed sometime in the 1800s. The people who laid that out could not conceptualize a vehicle and implement this large. And this is what happens when you start putting these large implements into the roadway. I grew up just outside of Leamington in Wheatley. The Highway 3 between Leamington and Wheatley. This is a familiar site for a good 7 or 8 months of the year, with farm implements, with traffic backed up, 2-lane highway, 80 kilometer an hour speed limit, and people taking all sorts of crazy risks trying to get around these implements and pulling out into head-on traffic. You can see here the folks are graciously crossing a solid yellow line. This doesn't look like risk. It's a typical concession. I actually think this image is from Iowa. But the one thing that does stand out right away is the proximity of those utility poles to the road and the wires above them. And when we go back and we start looking at implements of this scale, you can see we're beginning to encroach on the distance between those utility lines and the implements underneath. And what has happened over time, if only even taking into consideration the history of the organization, a lot of rural roads have been treated, maintained, rehabilitated, and in the process, they've gradually built up. And so what we see roads that are increasing in elevation relative to their initial design. And you'll see this, the driveways on concessions where you have a small slope going down to a property. At the same time that these implements have become larger and larger and larger. And it's becoming increasingly dangerous, and there's certainly no shortage of incidents where farm equipment trying to enter into the roadway has snagged utility poles or wires themselves. And it's something that I think road authorities need to be made cognizant of. I'm not sure exactly what the solution is. There isn't really a lot of literature or science to look at what might be involved with this. But it is a risk that I think is fundamentally associated with the roadway. I mentioned I'm from Leamington. Here's an evolving one attached to the agri-food sector. A bunch of migrant workers on bikes. There are more, and you can see in the background the sheer number of bikes in downtown Leamington. They're coming from the outlying communities, greenhouse operations, other types of operations, and biking in. And they're biking in on roads that have not been modified to accommodate getting around on a bicycle in a safe way. So what do we do as road authorities, as municipalities to manage this risk? Well, we've got a minimum maintenance standard, which is regulation that says if a municipality abides by this code, they're protected from litigation. There's some limits to it. The judiciary is empathetic to people who are severely hurt in the roadway. When a lawsuit happens, they want to make sure they're made whole. My members, I love them all. Some of them aren't all that great at documentation, and when you get to court, documentation is vital. And there's some misunderstanding. Still, even after 14 years and 2 reviews, There is a lot of misinformation and misunderstanding about how this regulation actually works. In addition to the regulation, the other thing that we've tried to do, the municipal sector, to think about rural or road safety more broadly and its application to the rural communities and rural municipalities, is we've undertaken all sorts of stuff. We've asked for liability reform. We've prioritized Vision Zero. There's been no shortage of things that we've done. 30 years we've been at this, and it's been fits and spurts, and this is what we have to show for it. And no, that is not an accidentally blank slide. 30 years have not really done anything to modify how we address risk in the roadway. So it doesn't need to be this way. I think that's fundamentally the message that I'd like you to take away today, is it doesn't need to be this way. So we at Good Roads said, look, we've heard from our members, we've heard from relevant stakeholders. This needs to stop. We need to find a better way forward. So what we did is we looked at what other jurisdictions had done to address this very problem. We started in the United States. The Federal Highway Safety Administration administers a thing called the High Risk Rural Road Program. It is unimaginably complicated. I don't know how anybody actually understands how it works, but it is effective, and it's a tripartite funding program between the federal government, the state government, and local or tribal communities. It's been proven to be fairly effective. New Zealand, also a leader in this space, putting in considerable resources into modifying and identifying risk and making remedies in the roadway. And same with Australia. Smaller programs in Germany and Japan have been put into place. But when we looked at it, we were literally looking at these three jurisdictions for some inspiration. Just earlier this year, the federal government in Australia announced they were putting $1 billion into specifically what they call black spot funding. So this is really problematic intersections on local roads. Disproportionately, that money is flowing to what they call regional or rural, in the Ontario case, roads, to address problems associated with these really vexatious designs. How do we put in place implements to fix this? In the Inflation Reduction Act, there's $5 billion set aside to address infrastructure upgrades. Overwhelmingly, this money is being targeted at communities that are agriculturally intensive, looking at ways that they can modify the existing road network in order to ensure safety for all users, including farm users. So when we look at it, we ask ourselves what needs to change. If you're looking at road safety, anytime you look at road safety, there are essentially four key things: speed management, roadway departure, intersections, vulnerable road users, and we stuck a fifth one in there called cross-cutting initiatives. And this is things that touch on either one, two, or all three or four of these other considerations. And I just want to walk you through exactly what this looks like, what we're talking about when we talk about each of these things, and give you a sense of designs that we've seen or things that we've seen in the roadway previously, as well as examples of what we would like to see. And some of these examples I'm going to put out are not in use anywhere in Ontario, in some cases not even in North America. But fundamentally, they've been proven to realize the outcomes that we have been told are being prioritized by Ontarians. So first, with regards to speed management. I can't emphasize this enough, and I know James with the OPP will certainly reinforce this, but is essentially the most important factor in non-limited access roadways where vehicles and vulnerable road users mix. What that means is if you have a bunch of people out there, speed is the worst thing that you can have in terms of having undesirable outcomes on the roadway. This is from a recent crash in Elgin County that killed 2 people. The speed was the overwhelming and primary factor, that image there. There is a consensus, and this consensus runs through road authorities all over the world, that if you can control speed, you can reduce fatalities and serious injuries. In Ontario recently, we've brought into place automated speed enforcement. This is the camera just down the street from my house here in Guelph. It has proven, I think, fundamentally to be a success and has given certain people many repeated reminders of how quickly they're driving through school zones. Now, the way the legislation is written, it is not without some problems. And this, I think, is a good technology that Good Roads endorse for two reasons. One, it's effective. Two, it modifies behaviors. And three, it doesn't tax already overtaxed law enforcement officials. There are rural limitations to this. The way the legislation is currently written, those devices that I showed you here can only be used on roads under 70 kilometers or 79 kilometers an hour. So if you're on an 80-kilometer-an-hour concession or rural highway, that cannot be used. The town of Mono near Caledon, the mayor there has been leading a fairly concerted effort to get that legislation changed. And that's being driven by the fact that many of the community safety zones where councils may decide to put in place automated speed enforcement outside of suburban and urban areas, those are often located on areas that are currently 80-kilometer-an-hour zones. So what the legislation has done is it has, in effect, taken a really valuable solution and denied the opportunity to put that in place in a lot of rural communities that stand to benefit from it. And when you see the data on a localized level in some areas, the carnage that's taking place on the roads is just mind-boggling. So anything that can be done to allow the benefit that the folks down the street from me are realizing across the province, irrespective of where they are, I think is worthy of implementation. Roadway departure. This is a really simple one, but I think it's one that actually we tend not to think about too much. But the solution's quite feasible. Wider edge lines. So in the absence of a large infusion of capital that would put in place linear barriers on the sides of roads, wider edge lines, so that white line that you see on the right-hand side of the image, have been proven to have really, really impactful outcomes for road authorities. So we're seeing 37% reduction in fatal and injury crashes where this is put on two-lane roads. And on rural highways, so anything at 80 kilometers an hour or above, we're seeing a 22% reduction. Signs and lines, paint are really, really viable solutions. They're not costly, they're very cost effective, and they actually achieve what we want to achieve. Safety edges. So this is a practice that's been widely used. It's a trademark practice, actually, widely used in the United States. There was a pilot project overseen by the Ministry of Transportation in 2012. And what they do, you can see here on this image, the old pavement effectively meets the shoulder at a 90-degree angle. With this new process, they actually they smooth that out so that it's a 30-degree angle, and then they backfill against that 30-degree slope with aggregate, and it's fairly smooth. And what it prevents is this thing that traffic engineers call tire scrubbing. And that's the sensation you get when your tire hits up against that right edge of the old pavement. And anyone who's experienced that knows it's a bit of a delicate practice to pull back into traffic without overcorrecting. And when you look at the science shows us this is the likely outcome. So your tire, in this case, would catch against the interior of the passenger side tires, you overcorrect, and there's a tendency to cross into oncoming traffic. You lose control. The likelihood, as soon as that happens, the possible outcomes become way more detrimental to the person who's experiencing this. Putting that 30-degree slope in here eliminates almost all of that tendency. It allows you to get back on in a safe way, but gives you the sensation of having departed the roadway. Rumble strips. This is a great example. We have rumble strips on the side. We have wide lines. We also have rumble strips down the middle. This is an American example. You can tell by the lines down the middle. Again, associated with really positive outcomes in terms of making sure people get home safe and aren't injured. You see on the left-hand side the statistics there. Intersections. This is an example from the state of Victoria in Australia, a typical sort of interchange between two regional highways and two-lane roads. And what they've done here, it's not exactly and bear in mind, this is Australia, so you're going to have to pretend you're looking in the mirror. What they've done has prevented that right-hand turn, I guess it's actually a left-hand turn, from taking place across oncoming traffic. So in this case, if you're in the two lanes running horizontally across the top, in order to turn to the bottom of the screen, you would go up and go to that turn off, that U-turn, and then proceed from there down. And what that does is it causes you to stop before you get to that oncoming traffic going the other way. And it works the opposite way. It is been proven to be a highly effective way of preventing collisions from taking place. And that's because there are a whole series of considerations that actually make crossing intersections, high-speed intersections like that, much more dangerous. This is a more dramatic example where, in effect, what you're doing is you're going past the road you're trying to turn on, and this is a typical T intersection. You're going past, you're turning around, and then you're making a turn with the flow of traffic, rather than cutting across oncoming traffic. There have been experiments with this, and I know NTO is always looking at consideration from other jurisdictions around the world, and near and far. But these are really effective. They really give you the desired outcome that you're looking for. And I know this may draw the ire of some folks, but I'll assure you this roundabout is optimized for a low-speed road environment. It is also designed to allow for the flow over of any large vehicles, so those aprons can be driven over. If you're in a large piece of machinery and need to do that, you can do that safely here. The reason we like roundabouts in settings like this is that they are fundamentally proven to be safer. You almost virtually eliminate the incident of head-on collisions. And when there are collisions, they tend to be side to side. So instead of having perpendicular crashes, what we're finding is they're more glancing crashes. And the outcomes in glancing crashes are much better for anybody in either vehicle than in a head-on collision situation. They also just, the road authorities that we looked at that designed this one have released a study and said it actually had an even better outcome in terms of slowing vehicles down, entering into the intersection. Typically, road engineers are looking for an 85th percentile behavior. And what they found here was, in fact, it was closer to like 68. This is a really good example. And you can also see one of the primary concerns with roundabouts is pedestrian crossways. They've made lots of really good implements here. We have relief islands, nice zebra stripes to give an indication to pedestrians and cyclists of where they're supposed to go. This is a good design. This saves lives. Vulnerable road users. This is a very Ontario, maybe Pennsylvania, Ohio specific vulnerable road user group. But the reason we flag this is that good roads need to work for all road users. It doesn't matter how you're using it. It doesn't matter if you're in a tractor. It doesn't matter if you're in a horse and buggy, a semi, a motorcycle, a bicycle, or your vehicle. Fundamentally, for the road to work and work effectively, it needs to make accommodations for everybody, reasonable accommodations. Here's an example from Elmira. Above, we have the old image. Sorry for the pixelated. I'm only stealing from low-res places, apparently. And below, we have the reimagined version, same road. And you can see here, again, many of these things have been put in place. We have a space on the side that can be used for bikes and for horse and buggies. On the right-hand side, you see the lane there. We have a median down the middle. The median has a sloped curb that allows emergency vehicles to pass. It has relief for pedestrians crossing that intersection. Fundamentally, this is a really good design for a low road. That works for everybody. I showed you at the outset the picture in Leamington. This is from Niagara. As we see an increasing number of folks coming from around the world to work in the agriculture sector here, a lot of them are getting around on bikes. And as I said, the existing roadway has not been accommodated to allow for these devices to be used as safely as they should. I mentioned at the outset, $42 billion in maintenance is required to get our roads back up to condition. As we chip away at that $42 billion backlog, we should be putting in place things that look like this. Here's an example from Thunder Bay. The old road, the new road. Is it perfect? No. Active transportation people would give me all sorts of gears about endorsing this. By nature of the fact that you have bi-directional bikes on one side of the road and a bunch of other things that really are immaterial, I think, at this point. This is fundamentally a better design than this is. And it's not just because the pavement looks pretty, it's because we've made accommodations. We've paved the shoulders. You see somebody walking on the left-hand side. We've given roadway indicators to show that people may be biking or walking on these trails. This is a good design. This is an even better design when you start putting in these flappable bollards. It gives even more indication that you need to be cognizant of your surroundings. You need to slow down. The retroreflective tape is indicative of that. And it gives assurance to people who are using that portion of the road that they can do so safely. Cross-cutting initiatives, and here's where this is where we reside as an association, and it's our ability to sort of stitch these things together. I want to draw your attention to two things I think we're doing that'll have really significant consequences for things. The first one's road safety auditing. So this is a practice that's used to look at roads, diagnose the problem, and get rolling with it. Essentially, this is your general practitioner and your specialist and the healthcare system working together. The gentleman on the right with the Lanny McDonald mustache is Ken Beer. When it comes to road safety auditing, he is the Wayne Gretzky of this. He's way out ahead of everybody else and widely understood to be the best in the world at his vocation. We've been working with him now for a year and a half to put in place road safety practices in Ontario. Ian introduced me. Ian was instrumental in us getting this Ontario Road Safety Audit Guideline moved forward. So we work with Safe System Solutions, that's Lanny McDonald mustache. They're from Melbourne, Australia, and ourselves to produce the Ontario Road Safety Audit Guideline. This is a really robust document that I think is one of the finest things we've done in the 130 years we've been an organization. Here's what it looks like when you crack it open. Here are 4 pages, blah, blah, blah. All these details, the stages, conceptual to staged, detailed design, pre-opening, a checklist of what you should be asking and what you should be looking for. I draw your attention to this. On the bottom, you see agriculture, and these are the considerations that we have specifically stuck in there that every road authority undertaking these exercises to ask themselves these questions. So there are approximately 10, 12 questions there for agriculture. When we look at emergency vehicles, we're only asking for 3 considerations to be put in place. This document is a unique experiment in acknowledging the fact that agriculture has different road considerations and road safety considerations than other vehicle users. The American one that's put out by the Federal Highway Administration mentions the word farm and agriculture exactly once. The one in Australia talks about regional roads, very little, about 3 or 4 references to agriculture. We recognized right away, and perhaps it's my latent OMAFRA experience, that it was important to put in place these considerations. So we're really, I can't thank the OFA enough for working with us to get this refined in a way that actually sort of, I think, works for the community. I said at the outset, good roads are roads that work for everyone. This is an acknowledgement that the agriculture community and the agriculture sector has a really, really prominent role to play when we're looking at road safety outcomes. The other one I want to talk to you about is reduced load period. We have been working with MTO to refine and enhance the reduced load period that is in place in this province. And so this is a model that MTO built, and we've been banging the drum on this, trying to get everyone involved. And municipalities, road authorities can go on, select their community, and download a document that looks like, the reason we're doing that is too many roads, unsealed roads across Ontario look like this, and we want to eliminate that. This is what the tool looks like. You go in, you plug in your variables, and it'll spit out data telling you, based on actual real-time temperatures, when you should be looking to put restrictions in. For the agriculture community, particularly those hauling heavy loads like milk, things of that nature, this is really important. And it's really important to road authorities to work with the agriculture community on this for two reasons. One, the old model of having static dates that say the reduced load period starts here and comes off here, they aren't working anymore. Climate change is rendering them moot. The other thing is that we also are seeing studies that come out that say having these restrictions on at the wrong time have significantly worse outcomes for the road themselves. We're talking about 10, 12x deterioration factors. The idea being that if you roll 1,000 kilometers of whatever, or 1,000 kilograms, excuse me, of whatever across the roads at the wrong time, it's the equivalent of rolling 10,000 or 12,000 kilograms at that point. That just causes the roads to break down. We don't want that. We want to be able to put these in at the right time, make sure they're effective, make sure they're widely understood and abided by. And the reason's simple. We don't want roads looking like this. We also put together a course. It takes 60 minutes. You can go through it, understand. It'll teach you exactly how the model works. It's been really effective in understanding and giving sort of clarity to what we're doing and why we're doing it. And then next year, this thing will disappear. It'll simply be a matter of going on, choosing your or choosing your municipality, and all that information in the report will be generated by the website and sent to you. So we're in the process of finalizing that right now. And the idea is, again, roads that look like this should not be leading to this. That's the same road in Puslinch Township, where somebody lost control when they hit some potholes. So our plan's really simple. We have submitted a business case to address rural roads specifically. We've asked for a multi-year funding arrangement of $35 million a year for 5 years. So about $183 million total to begin putting in place solutions like the ones we've seen here, specifically addressing rural roads. It's made up of action grants, so we do that diagnostic element, infrastructure grants, put hardware in the ground, variable message signs. These have been proven to be really effective in terms of modifying driver behavior, and analysis grants, because sometimes you just are left sort of scratching your head and it requires a bit of a deeper dive. All told, we are hoping that every municipality that is OSIF eligible, so Community Infrastructure Fund eligible, would be permitted to be part of this. The ministry has given us really strong indications that they want to move forward with this. And I think the reasons are really simple. It's a big bang for their buck. For you, I'm asking two things. Well, I'm sharing one thing. We have a workshop looking at low volume roads taking place in the fall this year. If it's of interest, shoot me a note. My coordinates will be on here somewhere. We'd be happy to have you there. And then the other thing is speak to your council. Tell them they need to prioritize this stuff. Write to your MPP, write to Minister Sakari at MTO, write to Minister Thompson at OMAFRA, and say it's enough. We need to start making headway on this. If we do, this is what it starts to look like. On the left, we have Highway 11 in Ontario. On the right, sorry, we have Highway 11 in Ontario, and on the left, we have Highway E22 in Sweden. Almost identical roadways. The Ontario example is your rotary phone. The one on the left is an iPhone 15 in terms of technology. The difference is night and day. We need more iPhone 15s. We need far fewer rotary phones. And we have a way to do that. So I want to thank you. Hopefully I've stuck fairly close to time, and I'm happy to answer any questions, and we'll take it from there. Thanks. And I'll stop sharing here.
And we have a lot of questions. So unfortunately, I don't think we're going to get to all of them, but we will get to as many as we can. There's a two-phase question here, two questions within one, basically, from Kyle Cowan. What is the legal width for farm equipment on the road? And the second part to his question is, do you suggest dashboard cams in tractors, combines, sprayers, or if any suggestions? So that might be a James question too. I'm not sure. You can.
Well, I can wait. It might be an Ian question as well. I'm not sure about the legal width. Quite honestly, I'm not even sure it's prescribed anywhere. Ian or
No, it's not.
yeah. So if it fits, theoretically, it's allowed.
I would say that you're obligated to yield half of the roadway. So in a 2-lane road, you're not allowed to be in the oncoming lane. So that's the difficulty that farmers have, where they go on and off the shoulder to ensure that they're not in the oncoming lane of traffic. So you are required to yield that, but if it's a oversized that you cannot drive it without being in the oncoming lane, you're required to have, vehicles, wide load kind of permits and requirements. But that's why the roundabout design is very good for farmers. Shaving those 90-degree curbs allows you to negotiate those roundabouts with that wide equipment. And the other slide you showed, Scott, of that smaller street with that kind of angled median in the middle to allow you to safely negotiate it.
Yeah, and then in terms of dashboard cams, I mean, I think increasingly what we've seen as the recipients being on the receiving end of a lot of lawsuits is that they are looked favorably upon as evidence at the court. Not that I'm trying to help anybody win cases against my members.
Yeah. So
Okay. Oh, go
Wait,
ahead,
you
James.
said something.
Yep.
yeah, as far as like the oversized width and loads and stuff like that, I don't think I had to look. I can't find anything that specifically states a number.
Right.
But if there's any damages to the roads or property, the owner will be held liable for those kinds of issues. But as for the requirements, there's nothing
Yeah.
that
Correct.
specifically states.
So we'll move on to the next question, which is best way to make a left turn. Pretty much every left turn we make, people ignore signals and pass. So we usually pull off to the right and wait for everyone to pass.
Yeah, and so that I showed you those two geometric forms from Australia. In effect, what you're doing is you've started practicing what that geometry does. I think that probably waiting for, I mean, it's the same as every other road user. Waiting for a safe time to pass or make that turn is the appropriate way. I don't know, Ian, if there's anything specific that you would flag relative to the implements.
Well, I'm going to say again that it is very difficult. Once you are entering the oncoming lane of traffic, well, before you enter it, you are responsible to ensure that you're not going to be impeding a vehicle coming towards you. And I would think that farmers in large implements are negotiating down the highway and you're making a left turn. What you need to watch out for is somebody coming up behind you, and that speed differential. You're not driving more than 40 kilometers an hour to start with, and
Yeah.
you've come to a full stop. we've seen a tendency for drivers approaching from behind slow-moving equipment to not reduce their speed, come up behind the farm implement, and then pull out when it's safe. We've seen incidents where people just pull out at their full speed, and that will you need to be aware that that could happen, because technically, if that vehicle has already entered the passing lane before you've negotiated your turn, if even if they're still going the full speed, the proper speed limit, you would be liable there too. So you have to really be aware of those vehicles coming up behind you that will whip out before you make that left turn.
Yeah, and I would just add, it seems counterintuitive to a lot of people, but you're pretty vulnerable inside a farm implement. I mean, even though it's large, it's not the same as being inside a personal vehicle with airbags and seatbelts and all those other constraints. And I think there's a tendency to think that just because these vehicles are large, that it's the people operating them are protected in the same way. That's not the case.
Scott, I'm going to ask a follow-up on that. So you had that really good image of kind of the U-turn lane
Mhm.
on that with those two east-west lanes of traffic. Um, and I know that roundabouts are better because they get traffic all going in the same flow, and then there's glancing collisions as opposed to T-bones. In Spain, I remember when I was a while back ago, I was in Spain, and what they have for vehicles taking left turns on certain roads is a lane to the right that allows them to then turn their vehicle perpendicular to the traffic where they wait and
Yep.
get through. Now that's bringing back, that idea of an intersection with a cross, and it could cause those kind of accidents. But is there any appetite for that kind of solution for left turns
Well,
to
I
get you
think so.
off the road?
Yeah, yeah. So I know exactly the style of that you're referring to, and it's I think akin to that the geometry of those two interchanges that I showed you earlier. What I think, how would I put this? The downside of the specific um, intersection type that you described there is that there is, depending on the velocity of the traffic that you're then going to be crossing, they call it a visual dynamic barrier, where it's hard to see, particularly in double lanes. If you have a truck in the near lane to you, it's hard to see the vehicle behind it. So what they've actually done is added a further left-hand turn lane for the traffic that you're crossing and put a buffer between it and the other associated lanes of traffic. So it's almost like an off ramp coming off of say the 401 or something like that. And the idea being that they've noticed over time, the evidence indicates that people pull forward unable to see the vehicles, and it can even be simple as two cars to see the second vehicle just lagging behind, and then they, as the vehicle's making a left-hand turn onto the road you're turning or that you're on, it's hard to describe here. There is risk associated with that, but there are ways to mitigate against it. I think a lot of the leading jurisdictions have made those modifications.
Okay, there's a question here. Can you drive a tractor on the road if you do not have a valid driver's license?
As long as it's not suspended for some sort of legal reason, like impaired driving. Yes. If you're under 16, though, you can only drive across the road. You can't drive on the road. You can drive across the road from one field to another.
Ian, are you keeping up with all these too?
Yeah.
Is there one that stands out to you that you want to ask? There's
Oh,
just so many
Sorry
questions.
about that. Sure, I've got quite a few here actually.
Yeah.
You did the dash cams, left turns. There was a comment from someone about um, I guess it involves working with your road your local roads department, and again it could probably speak to uh, the importance of having agricultural expertise on councils when it comes to designing roads. But someone has a problem, or they mentioned that I guess there's an entrance on a hill, and it looks like speed exasperates this concern as well. They have the examples of a neighbor that has requested that I guess the crest of the hill be lowered, graded when they do some road work, and that affords people going in and out of that laneway the ability to safely be able to, exit or enter that laneway without suddenly a car coming upon them. But I mean, it probably speaks more to the purpose of those road safety audits. I would imagine this is the kind of thing that would be picked up by your road safety audits as a red flag. I
Yeah.
know the safety audits are a great thing, but uh, there's because we've never done them in Ontario. You're going to be dealing with examples of massively looking at all the roads that exist,
Yeah.
as opposed to ideally you would just be looking at roads as they're being designed and trying to get this information in your development. But
So what other jurisdictions have done, in the Australians have really established themselves as leaders in this. And this specific thing, it's called a black spot. So you have a zone like this that, or a section of the road that has this problem. And oftentimes it's associated with elevations, crests, and things of that nature. They will go in, acknowledge the risk, and then put in place a lot of temporary remediations and see if that has the desired outcome. So this could be narrowing of the lane and a speed reduction as you approach the crest in order to give people more time. I mean, in dramatic cases, it could be a reconfiguration of the road. But that's less permanent, or temporary rather, that's much more permanent. But it is an opportunity through that auditing process to diagnose these problems. The other thing that they've done, and you saw it referenced there, is this black spot zones. And these are where there's really sort of long-term difficulties associated with the section of the road. It gets signed in a way that sort of actually leaves you feeling like you're really entering something risky, right? It does have the way the signs are designed, the way they're positioned, the reinforcement of the signs over as you're traveling, uh, really imparts this notion of risk on you. And it does, like, same way you see speed enforcement camera, it does actually cause you to modify your behavior. I think that the situation they described there is ripe for trying something like this, proving that in fact it works. I don't think this is not a unique solution that doesn't exist elsewhere in the world. And we just need to bring some of those ideas from elsewhere and put them in place here.
thank you. So we're running a little late. We do have a few more questions. I'm going to try to get to one or two. And we are going to try to have a kind of a bulk response to the guests on participants on today's webinar, and kind of answer all these questions at a later point. But I'm just going to ask you two really quick ones if I could. Do you have any idea if it's the slope coming off, road regrading? Is there a requirement for it to be a 30-degree slope? And I'm going to add to that, you mentioned early on about uh, vertical clearance for hydro lines. And again, it's going to speak to the importance of having ag expertise on your council road design or your council decisions. What do you do if you find those elevations for a hydro line are suddenly putting you at risk when you're going in and out of your lane?
So in terms of the specification on the 30-degree grade, you're talking about the edge of the pavement?
Mhm.
Yeah, I don't think that I may be wrong. There are a lot of standards, but I do not believe that any of the OPSS standards actually specify that. But it is a safety consideration that can be put in place. I will have to find exactly what the outcomes of that pilot project that MTO undertook in 2012 and share those back. And then I honestly don't have an acceptable answer for what you would do in that case. In the latter case where you have encroachment into utility services above your road allowance. Um, let me get some answers from folks who deal in this space and get those back to you, and you can share them perhaps with the attendees, Ian.
and maybe it's good information for the audit. So I'm going to ask one general question at the end, and I think James and Scott can maybe both answer this. And it's kind of the theme of today's webinar from Tyler. Are the road safety issues the fault of the road or the road user? I assume it's both, but James, can you maybe give us a little comment on that, your findings, and Scott as well?
I find it's kind of a bit of both, right? You get a lot of people that are impatient, and like I know people are saying the left hand passing is right. It's frustrating, right? You still have to be make aware of your surroundings. You have to yield the right of way. If someone's passing at a high rate of speed, technically, based on the Highway Traffic Act, they have the right of way. Now, also being said, right, you go into a blind corner. I saw someone's comment there about a couple bends, right? You're in a big vehicle. You can't see what's on the other side of that bend, right? So you try to get over as far right as you can. So I think it's a bit of both in that aspect.
Yeah, and I would agree with what James said there. Fundamentally, we're dealing with human beings who are fallible. I think that the science has evolved to the point where if you look at the safe systems approach that's being used increasingly, it recognizes that people make errors. And so to the extent that which we can modify the built environment to ensure that those errors aren't catastrophic, that's the built environment. That's the road's fault, if you will. At the same time, and I don't think the OFA is cultivating, or any OFA members are cultivating money trees. So we're unfortunately stuck in this situation where there are limited resources. But I think a bit of experimentation and a willingness to move beyond the status quo is one of the biggest sort of impediments to doing this. We hear from people who have really great solutions that could be put in place today that would save lives, and they have difficulty convincing my members to do that. So, I mean, that's partly my job is to say there's a better way here. I think the other thing that James said is that increasingly, I think we're seeing there's a really pronounced segment of the motoring public that are driving way too aggressively and way too quickly. I think as a society in Ontario, our default is that we should all be able to drive just 20 kilometers an hour over what the speed limit is. Like that's sort of like the natural assumption.
You can't?
Well, you can. There are consequences, and ideally, those consequences should not result in people, being left paralyzed or dead. Those numbers and those signs are there for a specific reason. And for my members, this is, for people who get upset about tax rates and things like this is a really easy way to control these tax rates, right? One lawsuit can set a municipality back tens of millions of dollars now. This is not uncommon. We just need to get moving forward with this. And the one thing we haven't even talked on is the healthcare implications of this, right? Like they're extensive, into the billions of dollars we're spending every year to treat people who've been hurt because we haven't put the proper investments into the roadways.
Thank you. So I'm just going to say a little summary here, Joanne, before I pass it back to you. Scott, at the start, you gave some stats, 145 billion kilometers a year. We've looked at that, and thankfully, we've got some stats from OPP when it comes to accidents involving farm vehicles. So per kilometer on the road, and this also speaks to your point, over half of the accidents and probably half of the significant accidents, or I shouldn't say I should say collisions because they're not accidents, but are in rural areas, which boggles the mind because the massive proportion of vehicles are in urban areas, the Golden Horseshoe, etc. But these stats kind of show per kilometer on the road. Cars drive 2,000 or 3,000 kilometers per kilometer that I drive my implement or my tractor on the road. But these farm vehicles, when they are in a collision, per kilometer they're on the road, they're 5.5 times more likely to be in a collision per kilometer they drive. And these are almost 4 times more likely to result in a fatality of someone. So it's important, yes, that people are aware of the laws, obligations they have as drivers. It's a privilege, not it's a privilege to drive, so they need to keep that in mind. Yes, people tend to drive faster in these rural areas. They think they can save time. It's becoming a rush hour, 24 hours a day in Ontario, including out in our rural areas. And I think that difference in speed when you get into rural communities and people are popping 20 or 25 kilometers over the 80-kilometer speed limit, and you're coming across a piece of heavy equipment that's only driving, 30 kilometers an hour, uh, you're basically hitting a wall. And I would hope that drivers start to get that message across themselves.
I know we are after 1 o'clock. There are so many questions, but I just wondered maybe we can just do a couple more. If people need to leave, they can leave. But since we have you on, if you have a couple more moments, I'm sorry, Scott.
What-
There is one question here about mud on the roadway. So, in a wet, muddy harvest season when tracks, like this individual would like to know, like legally speaking, how much is allowed on the road for tracks and debris?
Uh, I don't think it's specified by quantity, right? Is it?
Right.
I think there is an obligation, if it's excessive, to actually remove it.
Yeah, James could probably confirm that you are obligated the same way as once that pass vehicle passes you and they are actually in the lane, it's not your lane to turn left into anymore. You are obligated to ensure that you do not leave debris and obstructions on the road. Is that right, James? Generally?
Yeah.
Yeah, like if let's say you're a commercial motor vehicle and you're transporting, I don't know, gravel and stuff, and gravel starts falling off the truck, right? Now you're putting gravel on the road, and that's harmful for other. It's no different, and then with the tires, right? You start putting mud and stuff on the roadway, which then causes different traction on the road, and who knows? Now you're going down the what if section, but yeah, you can't have anything fall excessive, right? Obviously, when you're coming out of a field and there's going to be mud coming on the road, that's you can't help that. But if it's excessive, you're going to have to get that cleaned up.
Big chunks, etc. Right? So that people will avert and cause an accident.
Okay, there's another one that was emailed to me. I live in cucumber country. How many grain buggies can you legally haul behind a pickup truck fully loaded? I regularly see 4 to 6 buggies. Any input on that?
I'm going to let James take it from there, but I will tell you, you can pull 2 implements behind a farm pickup truck. That's your limit. Behind your tractor, you can pull as many grain bins as you require. However, you are obligated to have control of all of those pieces of equipment. They have to have the right hookups, chains to hold the weight. But for a farm plated pickup truck, you can't take more than 2 implements. Is that right, James? Anymore?
Yeah, I believe so. I'm not 100% sure, but I believe that's correct.
I did put some links in the chat early on. I hope folks can scan back up, and there are some. The Minister of Transportation has updated their farm vehicles on the highway guide. They just came out, English and French versions. There's a link to that. Very handy. I would recommend all the OPP officers have a look at it as well. And there is some links to the OFA's resource pages, a couple of items there. And if you go to the resource pages, I'm sure you can just type in farm vehicles or farm equipment and get some information there as well. But good question from the cucumber country.
And maybe we'll just end it off with this one. Again, we are running a little bit late, but all great questions. So I didn't want to, cut it off. But what are the laws regarding loading highway trailers on the road with farm equipment during harvest season? I guess this is when it's too wet to do so in the field.
I'll defer to the legal authorities. Yeah.
I was going to wait till James wanted to answer. If he doesn't, I can answer. But
I'm a little confused about the question, like loading the trailer?
So I think it means I've got I'm harvesting some grain, and the equipment I have to take it to the elevator. I can't put on the field because it's going to sink in, so I put it at the side of the road, and then I have to load it. And I'm doing this function on the highway section, right?
Using a grain buggy.
Yeah.
My understanding is that you can't obstruct the roadway. So if you're stationary, load, like if you're sitting on the side of the road and you're waiting to go forward in traffic, that's fine. But if you're sitting on the side of the road and you're blocking partial of the road, it is under the Highway Traffic Act that you can't obstruct any of part of the roadway. So
I would add as well that, Chris, I think your best bet is to ensure that you've got, proper warnings. This is, as you're saying, you have no other choice but to obstruct the road. So you need to do as best as you can to avail other vehicles of the roadway. You can't be stationary on it, as James mentioned, Officer Constable Zavitz, but you got to make sure you've got as many cones and hazards and even spotters to make sure that people are aware that there is an obstruction in the road. And if there is an accident, I'm afraid you are still responsible. You've caused that accident, but you've got to. We all want to get home safe, and especially in harvest, where we have tight windows. So it's really important you do everything you can to ensure to reduce the likelihood of this accident occurring.
All right, we will wrap it up. Thank you everyone for coming. Thank you, Scott. Thank you, Jamie. Thank you, Ian, for all having input and for your presentations. As we can see, we had a lot of participants on this call, so our farmers and our members know that this is important and they want to do the best so that everyone stays safe. So thanks for joining. Thank you, everyone. And I don't know if you have a couple of last minute remarks, Ian, but I think we'll wrap it up here.
No, I just appreciate Constable Zavitz and Scott Butler's dedicating the time to this important issue with us. Thank you very much. And this is a great opportunity to increase our awareness.
And I've saved the chat, so I see questions that we've missed, unfortunately.
Yep.
But we did put our contact information also at the top of the chat, so you're more than welcome to reach out, and we will do our best to answer any questions that we missed.
Sounds good.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.